At Camp Artemis, the most elite snipers in America train to become legends. Master Chief Calloway runs the impossible Ghost Range, where even decorated SEALs struggle to hit their targets. When a quiet janitor asks for a chance, laughter erupts across the firing line. The chief hands over his rifle as a joke. 5 perfect shots later, the scoreboard flashes a new record. The range falls silent. The janitor calmly returns to her mop without a word, leaving everyone to wonder who this woman really is. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing for more untold tales of extraordinary people hiding in plain sight. The Nevada desert sun beat down on Camp Artemis with relentless intensity, turning the classified military training facility into a furnace of dust and discipline. Rows of nondescript buildings shimmered in the heat, their purpose hidden behind layers of security clearances and need-to-know protocols. This was where America forged its deadliest warriors, far from prying eyes. In the eastern corridor of Building 7, a woman in a gray maintenance uniform moved with quiet efficiency. Nix Varley kept her gaze down as she methodically cleaned the polished floors, her movements precise and economical. There was something almost military in her routine, the way she divided each section into quadrants, the consistency of her strokes, the absence of wasted motion. Yet no one noticed. To the operators and officers who passed by, she was just another invisible support staff member, part of the facility's background machinery. As she worked, fragmented images flickered through her mind like a malfunctioning projector, hands steadying a rifle against her shoulder, a medal being placed carefully in a wooden box, hushed conversations in sterile rooms with people whose faces remained blurry. These impressions came and went so quickly that Nix had learned to ignore them, treating them as meaningless static rather than fragments of a past she could no longer fully recall. Her watch beeped softly. Time to clean the outdoor ranges. She gathered her supplies and headed outside, squinting against the harsh light. The temperature had climbed past 95 degrees, but Nix barely registered the heat as she made her way toward the farthest range, the infamous Ghost Range, where the facility's most elite training took place. Master Chief Riker Calloway stood with his back straight as a flagpole, watching a line of Navy SEALs prepare for their qualification round. At 55, Calloway remained one of the finest snipers the military had ever produced. His weathered face, mapped with lines from years squinting down scopes in hostile territories, betrayed nothing as he observed the operators before him. "Gentlemen," his voice carried across the range without him having to raise it. "This course separates the elite from the merely adequate. 5 targets, variable distances, unpredictable wind conditions. Miss once, you start over. This isn't about being good enough. This is about perfection." Nix kept to the edges of the range, cleaning equipment stands and collecting discarded water bottles. She worked silently, but her eyes occasionally drifted toward the shooting positions where the SEALs were taking their turns. Lieutenant Thorne Westerland stepped up to the firing position. Tall and broad-shouldered with a square jaw that seemed sculpted for recruitment posters, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his own exceptional abilities. As he settled into position, he made a minor adjustment to his scope, took a breath, and began firing. 5 shots, 5 hits, all within the center ring. Not perfect, but impressive enough that several of the other SEALs nodded in appreciation. The digital scoreboard flickered, registering his score, a new record for the day's qualifications. Westerland stood and turned with a self-satisfied smile. "That's how it's done, gentlemen," he announced, noticing Nix mopping nearby. "Hey, janitor, make sure you get this side extra clean. History was just made." Several of the operators chuckled. Nix said nothing, continuing her work without looking up. But for just a moment, her eyes lingered on Westerland's rifle, not with envy or admiration, but with something closer to professional assessment. The moment passed so quickly that only Calloway, whose job required noticing details others missed, caught it before dismissing it as nothing important. The day continued with more SEAL candidates attempting the course. Few managed to match Westerland's score, and Calloway's frustration grew visible in the tightening of his jaw and the increasingly biting commentary he offered. "You call yourselves elite?" he barked after a particularly disappointing round. "My grandmother could shoot better than this, and she's been dead for 15 years. The sun climbed higher, baking the range in heat that distorted the air above the targets. Nix moved her cleaning operation closer to the firing line, carefully staying out of the way but within earshot of Calloway's instructions. When she bent to clean a spill near the shooting position, Westerlund returned from the water station and intentionally kicked over his bottle, sending water splashing across the area she had just finished. "Oops," he said, not bothering to look at her. "Looks like you missed a spot." Several of the younger SEALs snickered, but Calloway shot them a look that immediately straightened their faces. Nix simply retrieved her mop and began cleaning again, saying nothing. As she worked, she subtly shifted her stance, her body unconsciously mirroring the shooting position Calloway had demonstrated earlier. The Master Chief noticed this mimicry but said nothing, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the janitor more carefully than he had before. When the range emptied for lunch, Nix remained behind. She stood at the firing line, alone with the desert wind and distant targets. Her hands came up, forming the shape of a rifle against her shoulder. She made tiny adjustments for imaginary windage, her index finger extending slightly as if caressing a trigger. "Something interesting out there?" Calloway's voice came from behind her. Nix's hands dropped immediately to her sides. She hadn't heard him return. "The wind changed," she said quietly, keeping her eyes downrange. "Third target needs a half-minute adjustment." Calloway's weathered face registered surprise before settling back into its customary neutrality. "And you'd know that how?" Nix said nothing, simply retrieving her cleaning cart and moving away. Calloway watched her go, his expression thoughtful. When training resumed after lunch, one of the younger SEALs took his position at the firing line. He had struggled with the third target all morning, consistently missing by narrow margins that might have been acceptable elsewhere, but not at Camp Artemis. "Jenkins," Calloway said, stepping closer, "adjust half a minute for the crosswind on target 3. The SEAL made the correction and fired. 5 perfect hits. He turned to Calloway with surprise and gratitude, but the Master Chief was looking elsewhere, toward the far end of the range where Nix was emptying a trash can, her back to the proceedings. The afternoon wore on. More operators took their turns, their performances varying from adequate to occasionally impressive. None matched Westerlund's record. Through it all, Calloway found his attention repeatedly drawn to the quiet janitor who moved through the facility like a ghost. There was something in her movements, in the economy of her actions, that nagged at his professional instincts. As the shadows lengthened across the range, a group of high-ranking officers arrived to observe the final qualification round. Among them was Admiral Hawthorne, a stern-faced man with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. The operators straightened perceptibly at his arrival. "Chief Calloway," the Admiral nodded. "I understand your team has been setting some impressive records today." "Some have, sir," Calloway replied, his tone neutral. "Lieutenant Westerlund currently holds the top score." As if on cue, Westerlund stepped forward. "Would the Admiral like to see a demonstration?" Hawthorne nodded, and Westerlund took his position at the firing line. His performance was even better than his morning attempt. 5 shots, all perfectly centered. The digital scoreboard flashed, confirming a new record. "Excellent work, Lieutenant," the Admiral acknowledged. "Anyone else want to challenge the Lieutenant?" Calloway asked, his voice carrying a note of tired resignation that suggested he already knew the answer. A moment of silence followed, broken by a soft voice from the side of the range. "May I?" All heads turned to see Nix standing there, still holding her mop. The range fell silent for a heartbeat before erupting in laughter. "The janitor wants to shoot," Westerlund exclaimed, his voice thick with amusement. "Go ahead, Chief, let her embarrass herself. It might be the most entertainment we've had all day." Calloway hesitated, studying Nix's face. Something in her eyes, a quiet certainty that seemed at odds with her position, made him reach a decision. He unholstered his personal sidearm, a custom-modified M1911 that had accompanied him through 3 combat tours. "You know how to use this?" he asked, offering the weapon grip first. Nix took the pistol from Calloway with a naturalness that instantly caught the Master Chief's attention. Her hand closed around the grip with familiar ease, her finger automatically resting alongside the trigger guard rather than on the trigger itself. Proper weapons discipline that came from training, not chance. As she stepped up to the firing position, something remarkable happened. The woman who had spent months blending into the background suddenly became impossible to ignore. Her entire demeanor transformed. She became perfectly still, her breathing controlled and measured, her eyes focused with an intensity that caused Calloway's professional smile to fade into something closer to concern. The range had fallen silent, the earlier laughter replaced by curiosity. Even Westerland watched with narrowed eyes as the facility janitor assumed a textbook shooting stance. Nick sighted down the barrel, took a single deep breath, and fired 5 shots in rapid succession. The sound echoed across the desert range, 5 distinct reports that blended into each other with their precision. The digital scoreboard flickered momentarily, then displayed a perfect score. New course record. No one spoke. The SEALs exchanged glances of disbelief. Westerland's face darkened with confusion and the first hints of anger. "Beginner's luck," someone muttered, breaking the silence. Admiral Hawthorne stepped forward, his face unreadable. "Reset the course," he ordered. "Different targets, different distances." The range technician complied, programming a new configuration into the system. The targets repositioned, some moving further away, others shifting to more challenging angles. This was the advanced course, normally reserved for final qualification tests, not demonstrations. Nix showed no reaction to the change. She simply raised the pistol again, adjusted her stance slightly, and fired. 5 more shots, delivered with the same controlled precision as before. The scoreboard flashed again, another perfect score. Stunned silence fell over the range as she calmly placed the pistol down on the shooting table and stepped back. For a moment, it seemed she would simply return to her mop and continue cleaning as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Admiral Hawthorne moved forward slowly, studying her face with growing recognition. "Colonel Varley," he said, his authoritative voice now quiet with something like amazement. "Nix Varley?" Nix straightened slightly at the use of her name, a reflexive response to authority that she couldn't quite suppress. "Sir," she acknowledged, the single word carrying a weight of military bearing that no janitor would possess. "Good God," the Admiral whispered, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. Operation Artemis wasn't a failure after all. Calloway looked between them, confusion evident on his weathered face. "Admiral, what's going on?" The Admiral kept his eyes on Nix. "Master Chief, you've been hosting the creator of the Ghost Range in your facility for 3 years. Colonel Varley designed this course before she was declared KIA in Afghanistan." The statement landed like an artillery shell among the gathered operators. Several of the SEALs took involuntary steps backward, as if suddenly realizing they were in the presence of a ghost. Westerland's face drained of color as the implications of who he had been mocking became clear. "That's not possible," Calloway said, though his eyes showed he was already beginning to believe it. "Colonel Varley's unit was ambushed near Kandahar. There were no survivors." "That was the official report," the Admiral confirmed. "The unofficial reality is more complicated." He turned to the range technician. "Clear the area. Security Protocol Omega. Everyone without Indigo clearance needs to leave immediately." The technician nodded and began ushering the junior operators away. Only Calloway, Westerland, and 2 senior officers remained with the Admiral and Nix. "Sir," Westerland began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I should apologize for—" "Later, Lieutenant," the Admiral cut him off. "We need a secure room." 20 minutes later, they sat in a windowless briefing room deep within Building 7. The space was designed for compartmentalized intelligence, soundproofed, swept for electronic devices, and equipped with countermeasures against surveillance. The Admiral had called in additional security personnel who now stood outside the single entrance. Nix sat quietly at the table, her hands resting motionless before her. The transformation that had occurred on the range had not entirely faded. She no longer carried herself like a maintenance worker, but neither did she fully embrace the bearing of a senior officer. She existed in some undefined space between identities. 3 years ago, Admiral Hawthorne began, his voice somber. Colonel Nix Varley led our most classified special operations sniper program. The Ghost Range methodology, which forms the backbone of your training here, Chief Calloway, was her design. She didn't just create the course. She established the benchmarks that have defined excellence in tactical precision shooting across all special operations groups. Calloway glanced at Nix with new eyes, professional respect evident in his expression. Her final mission, the Admiral continued, was to embed with a forward team in the Kandahar region to test new methodologies in hostile territory. The team was ambushed. We received confirmation that all operators were killed, and Colonel Varley was listed among the casualties. He paused, his face grim. 18 months later, a deep cover asset reported spotting an American woman being held at a remote compound near the Pakistan border. The description matched Colonel Varley. We mounted an extraction operation and recovered her, but by then, she had suffered severe trauma, both physical and psychological. Nix showed no reaction to the account of her own history, listening as if it were about someone else entirely. The medical team diagnosed her with extensive post-traumatic stress disorder and significant memory loss, the Admiral said. Rather than force her memories back through aggressive therapy, psychological services recommended allowing her to find her own way back. They suggested placing her in an environment connected to her expertise but without the pressure of being who she was. Calloway's eyes widened with understanding. So you arranged for her to work here, at the facility she helped design? Precisely, Hawthorne confirmed. The theory was that familiar surroundings might gradually restore her memories without the trauma of forced recollection. Her service record was classified, her identity obscured. Only 3 people in the entire Defense Department knew she was here. Westerland shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the weight of his earlier behavior toward a decorated superior officer clearly weighing on him. I remember designing the course, Nix said suddenly, her voice quiet but clear. Every head turned toward her. I remember the calculations for wind resistance, trajectory modeling, the optimal positioning of targets to test different skill parameters. She paused, her brow furrowing slightly. I don't remember being a colonel. The room fell silent as the implications of her statement settled over them. The skills remained, muscle memory intact, but the identity attached to those skills had been fractured. The doctors said this might happen, the Admiral nodded. Procedural memory often remains when declarative memory is compromised. You remember how to do things even when you don't remember being the person who learned to do them. Calloway studied Nix with newfound respect and understanding. Ma'am, he said, addressing her with the formality due her rank, for 3 years I've been teaching your techniques to these men without knowing it. I've watched you clean these floors with the same precision you just used on that pistol. He stood slowly and faced her, drawing himself to attention. With deliberate motion, he rendered a perfect salute. Colonel Varley, it's an honor to finally meet you properly. One by one, every officer in the room stood and followed his example, including a visibly humbled Westerland. Nix looked at their salutes with an expression caught between confusion and recognition, as if seeing a ritual she understood but couldn't quite place in her personal history. After a moment's hesitation, she stood and returned the salute with impeccable military bearing. What happens now? She asked, looking directly at the Admiral. Hawthorne exchanged glances with the other senior officers. That's partly up to you, Colonel. Your official status remains classified. As far as most of the world is concerned, you died serving your country. We can maintain that cover, or we can begin the process of reinstating you, though that would involve extensive debriefing and likely more intensive therapy. Nix's gaze drifted to the window where the desert sun was beginning to set over the Ghost Range in the distance. I'd like some time to consider my options, she said finally. Of course, the Admiral nodded. In the meantime, I think we can find you quarters more appropriate to your actual status here. Calloway cleared his throat. Sir, if I may, Colonel Varley's expertise is wasted on maintenance duties. With your permission, I'd like to bring her into the training program, even in an unofficial capacity. The Admiral considered this. That decision will be Colonel Varley's to make, but I have no objection if she's willing. He turned to Nix. Your country still needs your skills, Colonel, however you choose to offer them. 3 days later, Nix sat across from Dr. Eleanor Reeves in a small office that had been hastily converted from a storage room at Camp Artemis. The psychologist had flown in from Walter Reed specifically to assess her condition, bringing with her a thick file marked with the highest security classifications. How are you adjusting to the new quarters? Dr. Reeves asked, her tone professional but kind. Nix glanced around as if still orienting herself to her changed circumstances. They're comfortable, different. Different from the maintenance staff dormitory or different from what you remember before? Both, Nix answered after a moment's consideration. The officers' quarters feel simultaneously familiar and strange, like staying in a hotel room you've booked before but can't quite place when. Dr. Reeves made a note in her file. That's consistent with your pattern of memory recovery. Your procedural memories, how to shoot, how to move, how to perform tasks, have remained largely intact, but your episodic memories, The personal experiences that make up your sense of self remain fragmented. Will they come back? Nix asked, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a hint of vulnerability that would have shocked anyone who had only seen her on the firing range. Possibly, the doctor said carefully. Brain trauma is unpredictable. Some patients recover most of their memories over time. Others develop a new sense of self that incorporates what they learn about their past without fully remembering it. What's important is that we don't force the process. Nix nodded, absently rubbing her left wrist where a thin scar circled the skin like a bracelet. The Admiral wants me to review my file, to read about myself. And how do you feel about that? Like I'm studying for an exam about someone else's life. Dr. Reeves smiled with genuine sympathy. That's a very insightful way to put it. My recommendation is that you take it slowly. Learn the facts, but don't pressure yourself to feel an emotional connection to them immediately. That may come with time. Their session continued for another hour, covering everything from Nix's current emotional state to her physical recovery. Throughout, Dr. Reeves emphasized that there was no right or wrong way to navigate this journey, only what felt manageable for Nix herself. When the session ended, Nix found Master Chief Calloway waiting outside, maintaining a respectful distance that acknowledged both her superior rank and her current state of transition. "Colonel," he nodded. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Chief," she replied, finding the formal address still awkward on her tongue. "And please, just Nix is fine for now." Calloway seemed to understand. "The Admiral mentioned you might be interested in observing today's training session. No pressure, of course." Nix considered this for a moment before nodding. "I'd like that." They walked together through the facility toward the Ghost Range, drawing curious glances from personnel who had clearly heard rumors about the janitor who had outshot the SEALs. Nix was now dressed in standard-issue khakis and a black t-shirt rather than her maintenance uniform, but she still carried herself with the same quiet reserve. "The men have questions," Calloway said as they approached the range. "I've told them the basics, but nothing classified." "What did you tell them?" "That you're a decorated officer who was injured in combat, and that your presence here has been part of a specialized recovery program. I figured the details were yours to share or keep private as you see fit." Nix appreciated his discretion. "Thank you." At the range, the operators came to attention as they approached. Among them was Lieutenant Westerlund, whose usual swagger had been replaced by a more subdued demeanor. When Nix and Calloway reached the group, he stepped forward. "Colonel Varley," he said formally, "I want to apologize for my behavior. It was unprofessional and disrespectful." Nix studied him for a moment. "Apology accepted, Lieutenant. I wasn't exactly advertising my background." The tension in Westerlund's shoulders eased slightly. "Thank you, ma'am." Calloway turned to address the group. "Colonel Varley will be observing today's session. As some of you may have heard, she was instrumental in designing the methodology we use here. I expect you all to demonstrate your best form." The training began with a standard qualification round. Nix watched from behind the firing line, her eyes tracking each operator's performance with professional assessment rather than the detached disinterest she had shown as a janitor. Occasionally, she would make a small gesture or shift her weight slightly, unconscious reactions to techniques that could be improved. After several rounds, Calloway approached her. "Any observations, Colonel?" Nix hesitated only briefly before stepping forward. "If I may," she said, addressing the operators directly. "Your fundamentals are strong, but I'm seeing a common issue with breath control during rapid acquisition sequences." She moved to the firing position and picked up a rifle, demonstrating as she spoke. "There's a tendency to hold your breath too long when transitioning between targets. Instead, try this cadence." What followed was a masterclass in precision shooting. Nix broke down complex techniques into understandable components, her instruction revealing not just expertise but a gift for teaching that even she seemed surprised to discover she possessed. The operators listened with rapt attention, immediately implementing her suggestions with visible improvements in their performance. By the end of the session, the atmosphere on the range had transformed. Where there had been curiosity and awkwardness, there was now professional respect. Nix had stepped naturally into a role she couldn't remember holding but clearly belonged in. As the operators departed, Admiral Hawthorne approached, having observed the latter part of the training from a distance. "Impressive work, Colonel," he said. How did it feel? Natural, she admitted. Like muscle memory, but for teaching rather than doing. The Admiral nodded thoughtfully. I've been reviewing your file and consulting with Dr. Reeves. She believes continued engagement with your expertise might accelerate your recovery without risking psychological setbacks. You're offering me a position, Nix stated rather than asked. I am. Officially, you would remain classified as KIA for security reasons. Unofficially, you would serve as a special technical advisor to the Ghost Range program, working directly with Chief Calloway to train our most elite operators. Nix considered the offer, looking out over the range where she had spent 3 years cleaning rather than training. What about my memories? They may return, they may not, the Admiral said candidly. Dr. Reeves believes that either outcome is acceptable as long as you're given the space to integrate your past and present at your own pace. This position would provide that space while also allowing your country to benefit from your exceptional skills. Calloway, who had joined them, added his perspective. If I may, Colonel, what I've seen today confirms what your record suggests. You're not just one of the best shooters in the world, you're one of the best teachers. These men would benefit enormously from your guidance, regardless of whether you remember every detail of how you acquired your expertise. Nix took a deep breath, feeling something settle within her. Not a sudden return of memory, but a sense of rightness about the path forward. I'll accept the position, she said finally. On one condition. Name it, the Admiral responded. No secrets about my situation from the operators I train. They don't need all the classified details, but I won't pretend to be someone I'm not currently sure I am. The Admiral exchanged glances with Calloway before nodding. Agreed. We'll make the arrangements immediately. 6 months later, the Ghost Range operated at a level of excellence that exceeded even its legendary reputation. Under the combined leadership of Master Chief Calloway and Technical Advisor Varley, the program had produced scores that shattered previous records across all special operations groups. Nix stood at the firing line beside a young SEAL candidate who had been struggling with his final qualification. The desert wind had picked up, making the already challenging course nearly impossible. Remember, she said quietly, the wind doesn't control your shot. You do. The operator nodded, adjusted his position slightly based on her earlier instruction, and completed the course with his best score yet. Well done, she acknowledged with a small smile. Across the range, Calloway watched the exchange with approval. The transformation in Nix over the past months had been remarkable. While many of her specific memories remained elusive, she had developed a new integration of her past and present selves. Not Colonel Varley as she had been, but not simply Nix the janitor either. She had become someone new who honored both identities. Her quarters now contained a mix of military commendations she didn't remember receiving and personal items she had acquired since her return. She wore no rank insignia on her training uniform, but carried herself with the quiet authority that had always been part of her, whether recognized or not. As the day's training concluded, Nix remained behind, watching the sun set over the desert range. Calloway joined her, respecting her silence for several minutes before speaking. Another good day, he observed. They're getting better, she agreed. Westerland especially. He's finally focusing on improvement rather than showing off. You've had a good influence on him. On all of them. Nix nodded, her eyes still on the horizon. I read more of my file last night, she said after a moment. Calloway waited, allowing her to continue at her own pace. Operation Artemis. I designed it to identify and train shooters who could operate beyond conventional parameters. The irony isn't lost on me that I've essentially become my own test subject. And what would your professional assessment be? Calloway asked with gentle humor. For the first time, Nix laughed, a sound so rare that it momentarily startled them both. Promising but unorthodox, she answered, echoing the phrase that appeared repeatedly in her own personnel evaluations. They stood together as darkness settled over Camp Artemis, the facility lights coming on one by one. I may never remember everything, Nix said finally, but I'm starting to think that might be okay. Who I was shaped who I am, whether I remember it all or not. Calloway nodded his understanding. We're defined by what we do, not just what we remember. Exactly, she agreed, turning back toward the main building. And right now, what I do is train the best snipers in the world, That seems like enough to be going on with. As they walked back together, neither Colonel nor Janitor but something uniquely her own, Nix felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with recovered memories and everything to do with discovered purpose. Some heroes are forged in moments of dramatic revelation, but others are built day by day, shot by shot, in the patient pursuit of excellence that requires no audience and no recognition to have meaning.